Welcome to Stories of Amazing Grace. The views and opinions expressed on Stories of Amazing Grace are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Madison Church of Christ or the producer of this program. Enjoy.
Good evening. I'm Larry Souder, and welcome to Stories of Amazing Grace. We come to you from Bixter Chapel at the Madison Church of Christ in Madison, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us on YouTube. Some of you are listening on the radio, and of course, our live audience. Always glad to have you here. Our theme scripture comes in Romans 8:38 through 39. I'm sure that nothing can separate us from God's love, not life or death, or angels or spirits, not the present nor the future, and not powers above or powers below. Nothing in all creation can separate us from God's love for us in Christ Jesus our Lord. I want you to imagine that you are 85 years old. Some of you, that will not be a problem. Imagine that you're 85 and look to your left and look to your right. One of you will be diagnosed with AD. And yourself may be the caregiver. Kind of shocking. Our guest tonight is Dr. Sally Burbank. She's a doctor by day and an author by night. She's a Christian internist. She attended the University of Vermont College of Medicine, moved to Nashville in 1986. Her husband is a musician. I guess that's the reason. Completed her internal medicine residency through the University of Tennessee. Practiced medicine for 30 plus years. 30, is it 30? Okay. She has a website called SallyWillardBurbank.com. You need to go there. She is quite an author, besides being a medical doctor, and she has a series of books there, including one we'll talk about in just a moment here, called Alzheimer's Disease Caregivers Handbook. Here's a quote from her website. When I noticed how stressed out and overwhelmed many of my patients were from caregiving parents or spouses with AD, I began a 2-year quest to research everything I could about taking care of loved ones with dementia. I read dozens of books, scholarly journals, interviewed nurses and caregivers at nursing homes and Abe's Garden, a top memory care center here in Nashville. I collaborated with Sue Pace Bell, a woman who had successfully taken care of both her mother and husband with dementia, to write the Alzheimer's Disease Caregivers Handbook, What to Remember When They Forget. I've read the book. It's a very, very practical book. I encourage you to get a copy, as well as some other books she has on a table out in the lobby. Highly recommended. Some sobering statistics concerning AD. 1 in 9 seniors will develop Alzheimer's. Nursing home care is not covered by Medicare. 50% of the population who live into their 90s will develop AD. I tried to select a video. We usually play a video before we introduce the guest, and I looked at several videos on YouTube on AD, and they were discouraging. It's a dreaded disease, not only for the patient, but the caregiver has a terribly hard time. And I think you can best describe the caregiver's efforts in taking care of a patient is using the word love. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 5. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. And that pretty well describes what I've seen caregivers. So, instead of a depressing video on AD, I did find one, an elderly lady. She's 92 years old at the time the video was done. Her name is Wanda B. Goins. Some of you may have seen this on Facebook. A few years ago, she wrote and recited this poem about aging.
I looked in the mirror, and what did I see but a little old lady peering back at me, with bags and sags and wrinkles and wispy white hair. And I asked my reflection, how did you get there? You once were straight and vigorous, and now you're stooped and weak. when I tried so hard to keep you from becoming an antique. My reflection's eyes twinkled, and she solemnly replied, "You're looking at the gift wrap, and not the jewel inside, a living gem and precious, of unimagined worth, unique and true, the real you, the only you on earth. The years that spoil your gift wrap with other things more cruel should purify and strengthen and polish up that jewel. So focus your attention on the inside, not the out, on being kinder, wiser, more content, and more devout. Then, when your gift wrap's stripped away, your jewel will be set free to radiate God's glory throughout eternity."
Please welcome Dr. Sally Burbank. Thank you. Have a seat. I had a cold hand then. Did you notice that? What does that mean?
Warm heart.
Yeah, right. That's a medical term for it. Okay. You provided us with a handout. Did everybody get one? If not, raise your hand. Someone will come around and hand one to you. Well, I've read your book. As I said, it's very, very practical. A lot of information there, how to take care of a spouse or a brother or sister or other loved one. But let's start off with this handout. You've got some graphics here about the brain. Let me show the first one here. And in layman's terms, what does this mean?
The brain will show the slings and arrows, if you will, of traumas throughout our life. And so it will try to heal itself or protect itself. And it will, in doing so, form these amyloid plaques. If you can think of it as being like a suit of armor that the brain is trying to put on to protect itself. But like a suit of armor, if it's too heavy, too much, then it actually is a hindrance to the cell and it ultimately dies. And so what separates Alzheimer's from other dementias is that if you look at the brain after death with an autopsy, they will form or have in their brain these amyloid plaques and these neurofibrillatory tangles. And they're like gum in the brain. It puts a gooey substance that keeps the brain cells from communicating with each other. Brain cells normally are like telephone wires or circuitry that one will zip and zap to the other with little neurotransmitters behind them. But you stick a big blob of amyloid in there, and it just stops the traffic, just like when a telephone wire is knocked over by a tree. And then gradually the brain will die. The neurofibrillatory tangles do the same thing inside the cell. Amyloid does it between cells. The net result is the cells die and the brain will shrink. And the area that, for whatever reason, is most affected is called the hippocampus of the brain. It's in the temporal lobe, and it is specifically responsible for short-term memory. And so because it preferentially picks the parietal and the temporal lobe, that is the most obvious sign of Alzheimer's, is their ability to remember something you told them yesterday. It will be just as if you never told them. And it is directly due to this degeneration or cell death in that part of the brain.
The next illustration here is a healthy brain and one not so healthy.
If you look to the one on the right, see how it kind of looks like an evil eye and somebody with their mouth open? You'll notice that that area is where the hippocampus is. And you'll notice how this one on the left has a nice, healthy, white area that comes all the way down, and there's a real degeneration or shrinkage in that area of the brain. And even in the rest of the brain, you can see there's more holes in it, which are called sulci, and that is from progressive brain death. And so on MRI scans, you often will see brain shrinkage in the MRI, specifically in the area of the hippocampus. So if I have someone who's really showing serious signs of dementia, and I get an MRI and it looks totally like the one over here, then I'm going to question, all right, what am I missing? There must be something else causing the short-term memory. And sometimes there are. It can be low B12, it can be thyroid. Just this last week, I had someone who flunked the Alzheimer's tests, but it had happened so quickly I was skeptical, and her MRI was normal, and so I did a battery of tests, and she had a really sky-high calcium level, and it turns out after running more tests, this lady had ovarian cancer that was secreting calcium. It's a pretty rare type of ovarian cancer, so you have to be diligent to look for all the causes and not just label anybody who's got confusion or memory issues as just being Alzheimer's.
If I go into a room at home and I don't know why I went into that room, or I go into that room and maybe I find my keys,
Yeah.
is that a senior moment?
It's a senior moment.
And if I find my keys in the fridge, what is that?
Yeah, that's a little more disturbing if you find them in the fridge. You know, it's more concerning when, if we're not paying attention, most of us are sidetracked most of the time. Like when we're walking with our keys somewhere, we're thinking about what we're going to do tomorrow, or we're mad at this person about that. We're not paying attention. And so a lot of times we'll flop down our keys, or recently I left my wallet on the top of my car while I'm pumping gas, get home, and oh great, you know, didn't notice it till the next day that where's my wallet, and then I had to think back through my day and realize, yeah, last time I used it was when I pumped gas, and have a bad habit of putting the wallet on the top of the car. So that's an example of, you know, being sidetracked, distracted, not paying attention. Now, if I did that every time I filled up with gas, it would be a little more disturbing. So you have to look for more than just scatterbrained moments that happen when you're not paying attention.
What is the difference between dementia and AD?
AD is a specific type of dementia. 60% of dementia is due to AD, but there's 40% of other causes. For example, mini strokes. People with hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, they can develop these little tiny lacunar infarcts, and they're like little tiny cookie cutters, almost like a paper punch, going in and just, you know, having cell death due to strokes. They're not, and usually with that type, you'll see a little bit of a decline with the stroke, and then they'll be stable for a while till they have the next mini stroke, and it's more of a stepwise decline, whereas with AD, it's more of a always downward trajectory. And interestingly, they have found as we have more tools now to try to sort out, is this really AD or is this some other cause? What we're finding is a lot of people in their 90s have both. You know, they may have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, and umpteen other health conditions, and therefore they may have had a few little mini strokes, but on top of that, they also have scans that light up and show amyloid. So we now have, unfortunately not covered by Medicare, which is a real pity, because I think it would be helpful to know for sure, but we have PET scans that can literally light up how much amyloid is in your brain. So if I have someone that I do that PET scan and it shows 0 amyloid, it's not Alzheimer's. And they're doing more of these types of objective tests, that and spinal taps, where you can look for amyloid in a type of protein called tau protein. And those will be elevated in people with AD. So you can get objective data that definitively says, yes, it is or isn't. But the problem is it's not covered by Medicare yet. They still consider it experimental.
If I am diagnosed today, how many years do I have left?
Depends on your age. You know, obviously, if you're diagnosed in your 60s, then on average you will live 10.7 years with it. If you're 90 when you get it, average is 3.7. But on average, if you take all comers, it's about 7 years.
But people can get this at a young age as well?
They can.
If they have a stroke or some
Not so
trauma?
much the stroke. It tends to be more genetic if people get it younger, which brings me to another interesting thing about Alzheimer's disease. We've discovered that about 60% of AD is associated with a bad gene called the ApoE4 gene. Now, to simplify this, there are 3 types of ApoE genes. There's a 2, a 3, and a 4. And you get one from mom and one from dad. The ApoE is the good guy. If you actually are lucky enough to get an ApoE2 from mom and dad, you don't get Alzheimer's, period. It is that protective to the brain. Most of us have ApoE3. I've actually checked mine because I was curious, and it's a simple blood test, by the way. And so 61% of you in this room will have ApoE3. That makes your risk totally average. And it means if you get AD, it's going to be more from lifestyle choices, which I'll get to in a bit. The bad guy is ApoE4. If you have an ApoE4 gene from your mom or dad, your risk is tripled. If you're unfortunate enough to have ApoE4 from mom and dad, your risk is 10 to 14 times normal. And so we have found that 60% of Alzheimer's patients have at least one copy of this ApoE4 gene. What is interesting, though, is it's not a dead ringer that even if you have ApoE4 with mom and dad, that you're doomed to get Alzheimer's. That's where environment comes in. And that's where identical twin studies have been so helpful, because you can have two identical twins, both of them ApoE4, and one of them, if this one gets Alzheimer's, only 50% of the time does the other twin get Alzheimer's. Well, why is that? If they have the same genes, and if it were just genetic, they both should get Alzheimer's. And even of the 50% that go on to get it, there may be 10 years difference between the age that the first twin gets it versus the second twin. And what we have learned is there is a lot more control that we can have on if we develop Alzheimer's than we realize. So even though I sound a bit doomsday-ish that, oh, if you've got ApoE4, your risk is 10 times normal, that doesn't mean you have to be one of the ones who gets it. And then it's totally in your choice, or at least you can make the risk lower by some lifestyle choices.
You have some tests where you can pretty well determine if a person has AD or not, like
right.
Counting backwards from 100 by 7?
Right. But, I mean, interestingly, I will say, for example, this patient of mine who had the very high calcium, she flunked the test because with a very high calcium, her brain was befuddled. And so you have to do a battery of tests. You want to get history from the family and from people around her. I mean, 4 months ago, this lady, her brain was fine. And you don't just suddenly develop Alzheimer's in 4 months. It's a slow downward trajectory. But there are some specific tests if you want to look online and run some tests to sort this out. There's one called the Mini Mental State Exam, the MMSE, which is the most commonly done one. And it asks questions like, start at 100 and subtract 7 and keep going. Another one is, can you spell world?
I would fail that test for sure.
Yeah. Well,
now, you had one about animals I think I would pass.
Yeah.
Tell me about that one.
Yeah, that one's much simpler, and that is just name animals. Name every animal you can think of, and you should be able to come up with 20 animals in 2 minutes. And people with Alzheimer's can't do that. The other one that is the toughest, because I find sometimes, what I often find with early Alzheimer's is people will get a score of 27 out of 30, meaning they can't remember the 3 words I told them 5 minutes ago and said, now remember these words. They don't remember the words, but they can still do some of the other cognitive tests that are on the mini mental state. So I personally think the test is not very good at picking up early Alzheimer's. One that I like to do, that I often do just frankly to reassure people who are convinced they're getting Alzheimer's because, oh, they left their wallet on their car, is one that is called the Trailblazer. And it's a very simple test. What you do is take a piece of paper and you just scatter numbers 1 to 13, and then you scatter letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you have 13 letters. And you ask the patient to draw one continuous line alternating letter, number, letter, number, letter, number, going up the alphabet and up the numbers. So it would be A1, B2, C3, D4, E5, F6. People who are cognitively intact can complete this in 2 minutes. They might fudge it up in one place, but they can find their mistake. They can realize, oh, wait, no, I went from G to H here without going to the number. They can figure out their mistake. People with AD get completely flummoxed with that test, and they usually get so frustrated they just, put the pencil down and don't want to do it anymore. Another one that I find more helpful, because again, the short-term memory thing in early AD is what people most notice. You know, they may not be at the point of not knowing their wife or their kids and the things you see in more moderately severe AD. And it's one that I do where I will take index cards and put 10 words on it. And like I'll have names like George or Chimney or Chicago or kangaroo, just, you know, arbitrary words. And I will show the card to the patient, ask them to say it out loud. I'll turn the card over, show them the next one. And then when I'm done the 10 cards, I'll ask them to write down the words. Now, cheer up. Most people, even if they're totally with it, cannot remember 10 words. They'll usually get about 4, maybe 5 the first time. But here's the thing. With a normal cognitive brain, with repeating cards, they can get them. So typically by the 5th time that I've shown these same 10 words, they can usually get at least 8 or 9, often 10 of them. An AD patient, they can't. They will still be maybe getting 4 words. And so that's one that I find a helpful test as well, is just simply seeing, can they remember the words with repetition?
I think the one about the ABC 1, 2, 3 is in your book.
Yes, and that one, by the way, they say can be helpful in sorting out when someone doesn't have the cognitive skills to drive anymore. Because that's one of the huge issues with AD, is the patient doesn't want to give up the driving, they're in denial, you know, and you don't feel comfortable that A, they're not going to get lost, B, that they just don't have the spatial relations not to hit somebody, or in the case of the poor woman who wrote the book with me, her husband just took off one day, never called, never came home. Now, he didn't have cell phones. This was before cell phones. He's found 3 days later in Mississippi. And, you know, he had run out of gas, and he goes into a gas station and tells the clerk, you know, do you know where my wife is? And, you know, and then he couldn't remember her name. And she kind of, in talking with the guy, knew something wasn't right, and so she called the police. And luckily they had put out a notice of a missing person thing. But, you know, until then, this guy was driving all over town. And so people hate having to take away driving rights because it feels like you're swiping somebody's freedom. Often what you have to do in those cases, sometimes people will make the doctor be the bad guy, but I often say, you know, really you need to just get in the car and witness their driving. And if you tell me they're a hazard on the road, that they're getting lost, and the difference is, you know, I get lost if I'm some part of Nashville, I don't know where I am, but you often get lost driving home from church, driving home from Kroger's, driving home from your daughter's house, you know, and especially at night, if they lose their landmarks and that, and they can end up being completely lost. And then, unlike you and me, where we might be able to stop someone and say, boy, I've got turned around, I need to get back this way, you know, they can tell us directions. We'll go down here to the next left, then take a right, and we can get our way back to the interstate. You think they're going to remember, you know, turn right, turn left? They forget all of that. And so it is helpful to witness the driving. There is a school at Vanderbilt that if you really are hesitant to be the bad guy, tell them you want to drive, prove it. And we'll put you through the Vanderbilt driving school, and if you can pass the test, great. Sometimes I don't think that's a very fair test, though, because it's stuffing them in a car that they're not familiar with. So, like, I drive a little tiny Prius, and if you stuck me in some big old boat of a car, I'd probably crunch it, you know. So I don't always think it's very fair to stick somebody in a big car they're not familiar with. They don't know where all the stuff is. I think, at least when I rent a car, I feel flustered sometimes. So I think it's better to do their own car and just do your own test. Get in the car with them, see, can they drive home? You know, what do they do if they're lost?
Something they're familiar with.
But you can do the Trailblazer. If they completely flub up that A1, B2, C3 test and flub it all up, that means they don't have the cognitive skills to drive anymore. And that's where you just have to say, you know what, I know you want to drive, but I love you too much to see you get lost, to see you hurt yourself or someone else. It's not fair to you or to the other people you could hit, but we will make sure you get to the places that you need to go. That's really what they need to know. She also found taking him on drives was very helpful, because a lot of men like to, particularly men have a harder time giving it up. They like to drive. So she would take him out on long, just drives out in the countryside, and just being able to look out the window and see things kind of filled that void for him.
There's no cure, and one of your chapters also kind of discouraging for me, supplements don't seem to help either.
Yeah, the only one that they have...
Vitamin C doesn't help.
No.
My CoQ10 doesn't help. But some hope on one of your chapters here.
Yeah.
Vitamin E may help.
Yeah,
Is
they
that right?
showed in some early Alzheimer patients in the VA study that 1,000 international units of vitamin E twice a day was slightly helpful. The other thing that is a newer area of research is they now think that part of the problem in AD is with glucose metabolism in the brain. Normally, glucose is the food of choice for the brain. It loves glucose, but they believe now that particularly if people are overweight or pre-diabetic or insulin, have high insulin levels, that it affects the glucose ability to get to the nerve cell. And they call it like a diabetes of the brain, where the cell is actually starving for glucose. And so what they have found is that, and there have been several recent studies that are very promising, is giving people what's called medium-chain triglycerides. There's a supplement you can take. I got it off Amazon. And so these are 3,000 milligrams. But anyway, so they're recommending 4 a day of these.
What's that called again?
Medium-chain triglycerides.
Okay.
And by the way, it's what's found in coconut oil. So the other thing they are recommending for people who have early Alzheimer's, in case they do have this glucose metabolism problem, is using coconut oil. Now, the other thing that is extremely helpful, they have shown that if someone has what's called cognitive impairment, mild cognitive impairment, that is not Alzheimer's. It's kind of where they're not yet this bad, but they're not normal. They're not as good as they used to be. There's a whole lot of people who fall in this mild cognitive impairment category, and those are the groups we're really working on, because if we can keep them at that level, they're going to be able to stay home, they're going to be able to have a productive life. But if they progress to Alzheimer's, then it becomes more problematic for themselves and the family. And what they have discovered with these people who have mild cognitive impairment is there is a lot that we can do to prevent progression to Alzheimer's, even if they have ApoE4. What are those things? Number one, and look this up because it's the single best thing you can do for virtually every disease. It's called the Mediterranean diet. And it's not rocket science, but it's like what they eat in Greece. A lot of fish, in particular salmon, tuna, sardines. I'm not going to eat them, but maybe you will. But, eating fish, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, and then extremely colorful fruits and vegetables, particularly dark-colored ones like blueberries, raspberries, cantaloupe, mango, but lots of colorful peppers and things like that.
Steak is a no-no? Steak?
You just don't want to do it every night. It's like I tell somebody, if you're traveling, all right, go ahead and get your sausage biscuit at Burger King, but not every day. And as much as I hate to say it, bacon and sausage, I know, how can you take away bacon? I'm a cruel person. But don't make it a mainstay. Make it maybe once or twice a month you have bacon and eggs, but not every day bacon or sausage. And so what they have shown is if you follow this Mediterranean diet strictly, it lowers your risk for everything, for heart disease, for cancer, for Alzheimer's. It is the way you think about, what did Jesus eat? Well, he ate a lot of fish. He ate a lot of unprocessed wheat. He ate a lot of fruits and vegetables, whatever they had there, and a lot of olive oil. So, and of course, some red wine. They've also shown that there's a substance in the peel of red grapes. So interestingly, it's not so much the alcohol of wine, but this substance that's found in the peel of red grapes that will lower the risk of heart disease and Alzheimer's. So I would make, what are some practical things you can do? Number one, also nuts. They've shown that a natural source of vitamin E actually works better than the supplements, because sometimes the supplements can get rancid or, they sit in the bottle too long. But nuts are one of the best sources. Eating a simple handful, now I don't mean half a bag or you're going to get fatter than a barn. They're very fattening, 190 calories for a quarter of a cup. But a handful of almonds or walnuts has tons of vitamin A, and it has some healthy things in it. I would eat blueberries on your cereal every morning. And by the way, you can get frozen ones if you're cheap like me. Like with my mom, I've bought these frozen blueberries at Kroger's, and I make her oatmeal, and I stick in a little coconut oil, and I stick in a bunch of frozen blueberries. And this is a really healthy breakfast for her.
Are these things helpful before you get AD
Yes.
or during the AD?
These are the prevention things.
Okay.
So eating a diet like that can either prevent or at least slow you getting Alzheimer's.
Does it help after you have AD at all?
It can slow the progression.
It can.
Now, there's books out there that, frankly, in my opinion, are just trying to sell a whole lot of books. There's one in particular by someone named, I hope he won't sue me, I guess I shouldn't say it. But anyway, he's promoting this best-selling book that, honestly, if you bought every supplement he recommends in this book that's going to keep you from getting Alzheimer's and cure your Alzheimer's, you'd be spending $800 a month. Just these lists of supplements. Mm-hmm. He has some good principles in the book, but I think it's overstated to say if we just take all these supplements and eat the Mediterranean diet, we'll never get Alzheimer's, because that's not the only thing we can do. Diet is huge. It is the fuel of the brain, and I will say the coconut oil and the medium-chain triglycerides probably won't help prevent Alzheimer's as much as if someone has mild cognitive impairment or early Alzheimer's, then it will be the food that feeds the brain. For the rest of us, hopefully our brains can still take glucose. But I would try to eat the nuts, the colorful fruits and vegetables, and then the second thing, and nobody wants to hear this, you're all going to groan, exercise. You need to get specifically 2.5 hours a week minimum. Now, it doesn't have to be all at one sitting. It doesn't have to be...
What type of exercise?
Walking. Walking and just being more active. They now say that sitting is the new smoking. There's a lot of people who have sit-down jobs and they just sit all day, and then they think, oh, well, I'll go to the gym for 30 minutes, and then they go and sit and watch TV all night. And they have found that it's actually very harmful for your health, for your heart, for Alzheimer's, for everything, to sit all the time. So if you have bad arthritis and you can't get out and do a 30-minute walk every day, then just get up every hour and walk around your house twice, and then sit back down. And in the next hour, get up and putter around the house a little more, putter around the yard. But the point is, get more steps. Now, they used to tell people it had to be 10,000 steps, which is roughly 4 miles. I'm telling you, that's probably not a very practical, realistic goal for elderly people. But anything beats none, and more beats less. So try to be more active. And if you have arthritis, then just get up a little bit every hour rather than just sitting all day.
What about doing puzzles or learning a language?
Yeah, so that's the other thing. Bilingual people have lower rates of Alzheimer's. And so it is not just doing the activities that you've done forever that you're comfortable with that helps your brain. It's challenging it. So, for example, if you were to buy a little keyboard and start trying to learn to play piano when you've never learned before, or perhaps signing up for a salsa dancing class or something where you're memorizing footsteps, or a language. And you can get those with Rosetta Stone. You can get them with this little app on the cell phone called Duolingo. And you can learn it very slowly. Like I have a Duolingo app, and I can get on there and just learn a couple of words in Spanish. So I've got a not very good vocabulary. I know basura means trash because I have to leave notes for my cleaning staff, but that's something you can do, and you can pick any language. Certainly doing Sudokus and crossword puzzles are very helpful, because think about what is a crossword puzzle. It's trying to pull that word out of your hat. And so doing those can be very helpful. So you want to do things that challenge the brain. And that's why they've also shown that people who have college degrees or challenging jobs, where they had to think and always keep educated, have lower rates of Alzheimer's, or they develop it later than people who just had sort of a boring drudgery type job that doesn't challenge the brain.
What about caregivers? What mistakes do they make?
Yes,
taking care of
thank
a
you for
patient?
bringing that up, because that's why I wrote this book. I found in my years of being a doctor that my Alzheimer's caregivers were the most stressed out people I had, in large part because they didn't know what they were doing, quite frankly. And here's a sobering statistic, that if someone is a stressed out caregiver and fretting and stewing and upset, they have a 68% chance of lowering their life expectancy. So caregiving can kill the caregiver. But now the positive statistic in this is, if people can learn the tools they need to not be a stressed out caregiver and to take care of themselves, it does not shorten the life expectancy. So what does that involve? The first thing is you have to get in the mind of the Alzheimer's patient and just try to make it better. Here's the classic first mistake I made, is the person who's always correcting the Alzheimer's patient and telling them why they're wrong. For example, I had someone who, this woman's daughter had died of breast cancer, and the mother couldn't remember that, but the other daughter, who was the truth police, as I called her, kept feeling obligated that every time her mother would talk as though her daughter was still alive, oh, no, she had to correct her, and, no, Mom, don't you remember so-and-so died of breast cancer 3 years ago? And my question would be, what's the point of that? A, she didn't remember because she wouldn't have brought it up, and B, what's your point? It makes this poor woman relive that her daughter died of breast cancer. So what should you do? Start talking about the daughter. Man, I loved Beverly's maple sticky buns. They were so good. You remember how, and you remember that vacation we went on years ago to Gatlinburg? And I mean, you don't have to lie and say, oh, Beverly's not dead, but you can just start talking about the person. So if she starts saying, I wish Beverly would come visit me, well, that probably ain't going to happen. But you can say, yeah, I know, Beverly is such a delight. I loved, and just sort of divert the attention and talk about it, because she's thinking about her daughter. So talk about the daughter. That's the first mistake I see people make. The second is trying to boss them around when they don't want to do something. Pick your timing. I've seen people act like drill sergeants, and I know why they do it. They have an agenda. They want to get it done. Let's get this bath done. Let's get your breakfast done. And I'm probably going to be just like that, by the way, because I want to cross it off the to-do list, get it done. But it doesn't work to be bossing around someone who doesn't want to do it. Now, how do you make them do it? Because sooner or later they need a bath. That's always one of the big issues, is they always seem to resist bathing. And again, time is fluid for these people. They don't know that it's been 5 days since they washed their hair or took a bath. You can smell it. You know they need a bath. And so what I often find, several things works, and that's distraction and bribery. So the first thing is, instead of saying something like, Mom, I want you to go down to the bathroom and take a shower. Too much? Nope, not going to happen. But what if you were to say, hey, Mom, I want to show you this nice fluffy red towel I just bought. And maybe you just took it out of the dryer and it's nice and warm. Let's go look at the nice fluffy towel. And then, you know what, let's go in here, and when you're done with the shower, look at this cookie. I'm going to give you this big cookie when we're done the shower. And you get them in there, and then, now sometimes they don't remember how to bathe by the end, so they're a little skittish about showing their body parts. And I will tell the caregiver, have a little towel that you cover their private areas, and maybe something, to cover here. Ask them to hold the area around their breast or their privates. Why? Because that keeps their hands from grabbing your hand and keeping you from washing them. The other thing I found helpful is singing little songs. They don't have a good ability to handle a bunch of things at once. Great. Use that to your advantage. So you can start singing, this is the way we wash our arms, wash our arms, wash our arms. And then this is the way we wash our legs, and try to get them to sing with you. And then I had one patient, it was kind of funny, that they were giggling about what words to use for some of the private areas. And that got Mom to laughing. But the point is, the bath got done. And so you want to just give one simple task at a time. Don't go say, Mom, go get ready for bed. No. You need to say, let's walk down to the bathroom and let's brush your teeth. By the end, they don't remember how to brush their teeth. And so things that you assume they can do, they can't. The other most important thing I want to really encourage people, two things. First is they live by emotions. They don't remember your words very much, but they read your face. And they don't lose that ability to know if you're mad at them. And so even when you're mad at them, you have to try to keep a very calm disposition because it will addle them. If they see you're mad or upset, and it may be about something completely different, but they don't know that. I'll give you an example. In the book, Sue had this guy who mowed their yard, and he came in to get paid after he'd mowed the yard, and he sat down in the chair. He was a neighbor and a friend, and he started telling about this miserable daughter of his who, in a show of rebellion and anger, picked up his reading glasses, threw him on the ground, and stomped on him, broke his reading glasses. And he was furious about that. So as you can imagine, as he's telling Sue and her husband who has Alzheimer's about this truant daughter, his voice is rising, he's mad, and Ray, the man with Alzheimer's, suddenly leaves the room and comes back with a golf club. And he is about to clobber this guy because he didn't have the ability to understand. He's not mad at Sue or Ray, but his tone of voice and his anger, the rage on his face, was frightening to the patient. And he's literally about to clobber the man with a golf club. And so she had to immediately get into a calm voice, no, I'm fine, because he didn't understand. And so they really read your emotions and your tone of voice, even if he clearly didn't know what the man was saying, or he would realize you don't need to be getting golf clubs here. And so you have to really make an effort to stay pleasant, because if you get impatient and raise your voice, then it will addle them, and then it spirals downward. The other hard thing is when they repeat themselves all the time. She found that probably the most obnoxious, irritating thing, is hearing the same, question over and over again, and you just answered it, and you want to say, I just told you that, and it's so hard not to get snappy with them. But there was one day where he had just gotten under her last nerve, and she was so frustrated and wasn't very patient with him, and she went to bed and was just praying that God would give her the patience to make it through another day with this man. And she woke up in the night and felt like the Holy Spirit said to her, don't criticize a bird for singing the only song he knows. And it made her realize he can't help it. He's not doing this to be obnoxious. He can't help it. It is the only song he knows, any more than you would yell at a robin for singing the same song. And it totally changed it for her. She felt like the Holy Spirit had given her that message that, give him some grace because he can't help it. And so that's one of the other important things. And then a third is asking for help. Caregivers are terrible about being martyrs. They'll use vague words like, I'm just so overwhelmed and I'm so tired. And, they'll tell people how awful their role is. But you need to be more specific. You have a whole church community here, many of whom are retired. Many of them are more than willing to help, but they don't know what you need help with. So, for example, let's say you just need 2 hours every month to go get your hair cut, to get your hair done. If you were to say in your Sunday school class, could anybody in this Sunday school class come once a month and sit with Ray while I go and get my hair done and get some banking, and then commit to it? Once a month for 2 hours, this person's going to come. And so you have to be specific, though. And if people ask you, how can I help? Invariably, people always want to be the martyr and, oh, no, I don't, it's my burden kind of attitude. No. If they say, how can I help? How about saying, Ray loves meatloaf. I don't suppose you'd be willing to make a meatloaf, and then you could bring it to church Sunday, and I won't have to fix Sunday supper. In other words, find things that truly would help you. It can be something as simple as just somebody coming and vacuuming the whole house. They could come once a month and do that in their own timing, but you've got to ask. And I find caregivers are terrible about asking for help. And you have to. The other thing Sue found was that having a schedule was really helpful for her. And in her schedule, she planned 1 hour every day that when he was taking his nap, even if she didn't have the laundry done, even if she hadn't fixed supper, she was going to have 1 hour of me time. And she loved to read. And she would go out on the back deck and she would read a book for an hour. And that was her me time. And that would rejuvenate her. That she knew every day she had this 1 little hour of simple pleasure. So you have to take care of yourself. She also would get up and walk up and down the street while he was still sleeping in the morning. And so she would get her exercise in. Now, she couldn't go far. It was kind of just walking from this neighbor to this neighbor so she could see him, because he was the great Houdini who was always, driving off and leaving. And, multiple times this man would just wander off if you didn't watch him. Which also reminds me, you need to have either devices in their shoes, or you can get bracelets from the Alzheimer's Association that has their name and address, much like you would like a cat or dog. Because if they wander away and get lost, you need something that people can help find them.
And in the public, you need some type of card or placard that says this person has AD.
Yes. So if they say something really embarrassing, she mentioned there was one lady that went up and she had dementia, and she and her husband went into a restaurant, and there was a big, huge lady, and the Alzheimer's patient went up and just slapped the bottom of this poor fat lady, and then says to her husband, "Boy, she is a big one." Well, the woman thought the husband was the one who was being fresh, and she turns around and gives him the biggest glare, as you can imagine. And so what you need to have in your hand are little cards. Like sometimes they love children, but kids are kind of spooked out by someone who acts a little weird and, doesn't act normal. So having a quick card that says, "Please excuse him, he has dementia." The minute people see those cards, they're, "Oh, okay," and then they're fine. But, if they don't know that, they just think, this person's coming up and making a totally inappropriate comment.
Right. I want to allow time for questions. We're about to run out of time. While, is Anthony here? Yeah, good. Okay. While you're searching for someone with a question, maybe you can answer this one. End-of-life issues, feeding tube, give them what they want to eat.
Right, that's one of the problems. I give all the wonderful things about a Mediterranean diet, and that's exactly the thing they don't want to eat. Salmon and broccoli, great diet. It would extend their life. Do they want to eat it? No, they want ice cream. So you run into that dilemma of, the very foods I just told you they ought to be eating, they won't eat, and then they'll lose weight. And so, she reached a point where she realized, if I kind of let him eat what he wants and try to give him some healthy stuff, maybe he'll live 6 months less long, but he'll be happy, and he's not going to be giving me a fuss, and he isn't going to be losing weight. You absolutely do want to get a do not resuscitate DNR order. There is no reason to try to sustain the life of someone. What are you saving them for? So they can get more demented? There's zero reason if someone has moderate stage dementia to not have a DNR order, that if their heart stops, then it's time for them to meet their maker. Let them go. The other thing they've shown is you'd think, well, feeding tubes, because they'll guilt trip. Nursing homes will say, well, you're just going to let her starve to death? And that's the way it will be deemed, is that if mom's not eating much, well, first of all, in nursing homes, sometimes they'll just stuff the tray. I remember with my grandfather, we'd come in to visit, they'd stick the dinner tray way over there or on a tray that he couldn't reach. They didn't even take the lid off. Somebody with dementia is not going to have the wherewithal, and the truth is they don't have the staff to sit there and hand feed somebody and they often would serve things that slop all over you. Finger foods are what you need. But they've shown that feeding tubes do not prolong life. In fact, they aspirate the tube feed down into their lungs, or they end up with other issues, getting infection. The worst is when they try to yank out the tube, and they literally pull a hole in their stomach from trying to, because you can imagine a demented person, this weird tube sticking out of their stomach. You might have told them 5 minutes ago, that's a feeding tube, leave it alone. They're not going to remember. They just know there's this weird tube sticking out of them. So that's some of the mistakes people make, is they'll put those things in, and then 5 years later, they're completely demented in a nursing home, not saying anything, laying in bed, being kept alive, getting bed sores. What on earth is the point of that? There is zero quality of life in that. And I think when there's a natural, when it's time to go on to your maker. Don't try to prolong people's lives.
Gotcha. Let's see a question here.
Thank you, Dr. Burbank. As a hospice nurse, I really appreciate what you just said about feeding tubes. Families don't get it. Southern women want to nourish people. So I appreciate what you said. My question is about early onset Alzheimer's, like Pat Summitt had. You said that if you get it younger, your longevity is, longer than if you get it in your 90s, which would make sense because you're older anyway. But what is the difference between early onset? Why is it so rapid versus, just onset later on? Thank you.
It's often a different type. The earlier onset ones often do have more of a genetic link to it. So, for example, Down syndrome has a very high incidence of Alzheimer's disease in their 50s and 60s, much younger than the adult population. So some of it is genetic. If people get it in their 50s and 60s, there may be more of a bent towards genetics playing a role. And I only mentioned the ApoE4 gene. There's actually 20 genes that can be associated in one way or another with Alzheimer's that can affect their risk of getting it. And also longevity can relate to if they die of other things first. Somebody at 92 may not die of Alzheimer's, they may die of heart failure or something else. Somebody in their 60s, there may not be as many other diseases at that age that's going to kill them, so therefore they might live longer with the disease.
Could you repeat what you said about the high calcium?
Right. Well, this was just a unique case I had that, they brought her in because she wasn't remembering things and she was kind of cognitively not with it, even though at her physical 6 months earlier, she had been pretty fine. But she flunked the test. I did all these standardized tests and she flunked it. So I got an MRI thinking, this is awfully quick. Maybe she's got a brain tumor, which is what I was really thinking. It was normal. So then I have to do the more definitive diagnosis that, all right, well, it's not Alzheimer's, or she wouldn't have such a normal-looking MRI, nor would it have caused this much distress. So I just drew a calcium, B12, thyroid. There's certain other diseases that, as an internist, I know to look for if somebody is showing cognitive decline that's unexplained. So it can be things like B12 deficiency. I just picked up another patient, and that was the cause for his declining B12. And things like Protonix and Prilosec, omeprazole, and metformin, which are very common drugs, interfere with the absorption of B12 in the stomach. So those patients can develop low B12 as a consequence of taking their heartburn medicine or their metformin that they're taking for their diabetes.
What about Prevagen? Should we take it?
A lot of those, the print is so fine at the bottom. A trial is really not, you'll notice they don't say for Alzheimer's, they say for cognitive thing. And the problem with a lot of those studies is they're not double-blinded and they're not large numbers of people followed for a long period of time. And so there's a huge placebo effect with supplements and even medications. So, for example, if I were to prescribe a drug to all of you and give you a package insert that says, this drug has a terrible side effect of headaches, statistically 20% of you would start getting headaches. Likewise, I can tell you the positive, that this drug really helps. And so the only way you can sort out that placebo bias, or the part that the patient really wants their memory to be better, and that's all subjective, unless they're really doing well-done objective tests, well, who's to say if their memory really is better or if they just think it is? The only way you can do that is double-blinded, meaning neither the researcher or the patient knows whether they're getting the fake drug or the real supplement. And unfortunately, supplements don't tend to get researched much because, frankly, there's not enough money in it for big pharma. And they don't have to go through the FDA. The FDA does not require Prevagen, because it's not a drug, to have to do all of the million-dollar research that drug companies have to do to prove that it is more effective than placebo. And so I would say with something like that, it probably won't do you any harm, but you do have to be careful that you could be throwing your money down the toilet. There's all kinds of people taking a fish oil supplement every day thinking that's going to prevent Alzheimer's. I hate fish, so I'm going to take a fish oil pill every day. There's no study showing that one fish oil pill every day is going to prevent Alzheimer's. They're probably not doing themselves any harm, but they're spending a lot of money on supplements. Maybe they'd be better off to spend their money at the gym or buying a Rosetta Stone tape and learning Spanish.
Another question.
Yes, you started out with the statistics, but I was wondering, it seems like there are more cases.
Yes.
Is this escalating?
It is, and it's because of the aging of the population. Back when Medicare was started in 1960, whatever it was, when Lyndon Baines was in office, the average man lived to be 66. They were only on Medicare 1 year, if you took the statistical average of how long men lived, and women lived to 72. You can add almost 10 years to that now. Why is that? Statins, by using cholesterol drugs. People's LDLs aren't 300. They're not keeling over with heart attacks. We have great cancer treatment now. People aren't keeling over with breast cancer. We're doing colonoscopies and picking up colon polyps before they're colon cancer. So the long and short of it is, we've done a great job of prolonging life. The downside of that is we're now living long enough to get to the age, i.e. 85, 90, 95, where now Alzheimer's is a problem. Here's a statistic that'll really frighten you. 10,000 baby boomers a day are hitting 65. In 20 years, we're going to have all of those people at 85. And here's a more sobering statistic. Unlike my grandparents, who had, like my husband's grandmother, well, there were 7 in her family. So when she developed health issues in her late 80s and 90s, had 7 kids to help take care of her. Well, my mother had 4 children, and so there's 4 of us as she gets older that can help take care of her. I only have 2 kids. And so a lot of these baby boomers, some of them never had kids, some of them are divorced. There's not going to be the caregiving family members in supply like there was in previous generations. And so they're really worried about how we as a country are going to afford, if you have, divorced people who have no kids and they're now 90 years old and demented, okay, well, they're going to be in a nursing home on Medicaid. Where is that money going to come from? And so the positive side of that is the National Institutes of Health. My oldest brother, by the way, another reason I have interest in this is that he headed up the neurological research at the NIH. He was over 800 employees and would help pick the studies for neurological sciences. They have budgeted a fortune to try to get to the bottom of how to prevent and treat Alzheimer's, because they see the writing on the wall. As we've kept people alive, kept them from having heart attacks and strokes, with blood pressure medicines, with cholesterol drugs, with fabulous cancer treatment, then if we don't find a good cure for Alzheimer's or figure out how to prevent it, we're really going to be in a crisis financially.
Yes, but you're just answering that the reason is that we're living longer. But I'm asking, is it escalating as a result of lifestyle, environment? In other words, okay, we are living longer, and so if the skeeters don't get you, the gators will. Something's going to get you.
Yeah. Well, it's always been age-related, so that hasn't changed. So we do have a higher statistical percent of the population living to 85 and 90. But there are also, other factors. If anything, well, and some of it is Americans are all fatter. I mean, I'll include myself here. We overeat. We have a obesity problem in this country, and diabetes, and hypertension, and high cholesterol, and lack of exercise. All of those factors play a role in increasing the risk of Alzheimer's disease. You look back in the pictures in the 1930s and 40s, people were not as fat as they are now. Some of it is, of course, we have cars, and some people's idea of exercise is walking to their car. And then, frankly, the sizes of fast food, the portion sizes in restaurants are ridiculous. And so we are a fatter society, statistically much higher rates of diabetes, cholesterol, blood pressure, not exercising enough, not eating enough fruits and vegetables, and eating way too many chips and ice cream and cookies and that kind of thing. So we are a fast food society.
Just back off there. We are a little bit over time. Do you want to stay for another 5 minutes? Another question then.
Dr. Burbank, I would so like to have read your book, Patients I Will Never Forget, when I was taking care of my father who had Alzheimer's. It does give you a funny slant on the medical profession, and not the medical profession, but people that you have served in a medical way. So that is available outside. I'm kind of pushing your book, but it was great.
Thank you. I paid her to say that. And one other thing I want to point out to you, that the sadness of Alzheimer's often is not the caregiver, the patient as much as the caregiver. And I would encourage you, if any of you have loved ones, church members who have Alzheimer's, they find joy in the moment. They totally live in the moment. We don't do that. Like, I had a patient who brought her mother to the Wilson County Fair, and the mother had a wonderful time. The soft little bunnies and the cute, piggies and all of the beautiful quilts. Well, the next day, the daughter said to her, wasn't that wonderful at the fair? And she didn't even remember going. And so the daughter made the comment to me, well, I'm not even going to bother to take her anywhere if she's not going to remember it. And here's my question, why? If she had a wonderful day and in that moment was enjoying her day, maybe we live too much in a society that's always wanting to take selfies and pictures instead of just going out and enjoying the gorgeous mountain view. Maybe we all could stand to learn something from Alzheimer's patients of enjoying that chocolate chip cookie, of enjoying the beautiful ride, like Sue's husband, would love going for rides and just looking at the horses and looking at the houses. And in that moment, he's happy. And we forget, just because they can't remember things doesn't mean they can't enjoy life. And our job as caregivers is to try to keep them calm, safe, and to help find pleasure in the moment. And I think there's a lot to learn for all of us in that. Also, their spirit doesn't die. I think one of the most touching cases I had was of a woman who hadn't said words in a long time, didn't recognize her daughter or son anymore, but someone came in and was playing Amazing Grace in her room. And all of a sudden, this woman started singing the words to Amazing Grace. And so some of those tucked-in hymns that we have learned from years of church, I'm convinced that while our body ages, while our mind may get demented, the Spirit of God is in us. And it isn't going to get old It's just going to go into a new form when we die. And so, I would encourage you to think about that maybe it's not as tragic as we think, because their spirit lives, and they can have a lot of pleasure in the moment.
Can you explain the difference between Lewy body dementia and AD?
Right. So AD has the amyloid plaques and the neurofibrillatory tangles. Lewy body dementia has a type of deposit, a different type of deposit, and it often shows up a little bit more, shows up differently. They can have more anger, more personality issues, and things like that. So it's just a different type of dementia that causes a different type of degeneration in the brain. It's less common, and it often presents a little. And then there's also a frontal lobe dementia, and that one they often have personality changes and things. So, there's other types in the differential. Sadly, there's not much difference in treatment. We do have drugs for AD. About half the patients I start on Aricept or Namenda invariably end up stopping them because they're sedating, they're nauseated, they're dizzy. That's the problem. They have side effects. And the best they can do is prolong their, it delays Alzheimer's by 6 to 9 months. So that's the best that our current drugs are available.
Tell me one story from this book, and we got to wrap it up.
All right.
Patience I will never forget.
So this book I wrote actually 7 stories that have been published in Chicken Soup for the Soul, because writing's a hobby for me. And after I had all 7 of them published, I thought, maybe I could write a book and just put a compilation of my stories, both inspirational and funny. So that's why I wrote this book. And so he wanted me to tell a story about this somewhat strange patient of mine who, didn't have both the cogs in his brain functioning properly, and he was probably borderline illiterate. And anyway, with physicals, I always give people a review of systems that lists all the different, chest pain, shortness of breath, fatigue, insomnia, all these symptoms. And I ask people to put a check next to the symptoms that have been problematic for them so I can focus on the things that are a problem for them at their physical. Well, on this form, I have the word impotency. Well, this man doesn't know what the word means. So he's out there in the waiting room filling out his form, and he stands up, and he starts going around to the patients in the waiting room saying, do you know what impotency is? And then, the patients are horrified. And then he starts, in case he thinks they're stupid, impotency. And they're all like, okay, well, what am I going to say to this? And so then he goes up to my receptionist, and he said, Jana, do you know if I have impotency? And she said, trust me, Bob, no, I don't know if you have that. And of course, the whole waiting room is laughing at this point. And so she says, I suggest you discuss that with Dr. Burbank when you're in the exam room. So.
Wow. Thank you for picking that one story.
Yes.
And
I've got another one about the onion room. So one last quickie.
Go ahead.
So I had one other patient. This one is actually very inspiring to me. I had this patient who came in just dripping with, drippy nose, watery eyes, red. And I thought, my goodness, has her husband left her? Has her mother died? She looks like she's been crying for months. And so I asked her what was wrong, and she said, no, it's none of those things. I think it's my job. And I said, really? Tell me about your job. And she said, well, I work in the onion room. You ever wondered about the sliced onions on burgers? This poor girl, 8 hours a day, was in the onion room peeling and chopping and making onion slices for us. And she'd been doing this for a month, and she was miserable. And I was incensed. I went and called OSHA, and I said, this is, terrible. I mean, this poor girl, there's not even ventilation in the room. And he said, yeah, trust me, I've been out there 3 times, but onions are not a drug, they're not a toxin, they're not a poison, they're not doing anything wrong. I have nothing I can close them down with. And so I went back and said, why would you put up with this horrible job? And she said, well, I'm really hoping if I show my boss what a good worker I am, I'll be promoted to cabbages. And when I have a bad day, I will say to my staff, you know, it could be worse. We could be chopping onions.
There you go. Dr. Sally Burbank. Thank you. Good information. And don't forget the books are in the lobby, or you can order them through SallyWillardBurbank.com. Next month, Kim Harmon will share a family struggle in dealing with homicide of a family member at the hands of another family member. Her book is entitled Fall Forward. It's a story of struggle, strength, and true forgiveness. Now let me ask you a question. Where are you on your journey of faith? Have you begun the walk, or are you walking and stumbling like some of us are? 1 John 1:7 says, but if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship one with another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us or purifies us from all of our sin. It's my prayer that as you watch and listen to stories of amazing grace, that somehow this will help you on your journey of faith. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next month.